want to get to this story about what's going on in the Michigan primary, because that's happening February 27th. And you'll recall in New Hampshire, there was a late attempt to push a write-in campaign for ceasefire that ended up getting like 2,000 votes. I mean, it was pretty good considering how late in the stage it was. There is now an ongoing effort by some Democrats in Michigan to write in uncommitted as a way to demonstrate the frustration of Biden not demanding a ceasefire in the conflict. And I think, implicit in that is basically leveraging the forthcoming aid that is still being negotiated, I guess, and I think is inevitably going to pass as a standalone bill.
Insanity.
For something like $14 billion. But also the open door policy that the U.S. government has with Israel in terms of arms that are stationed in Israel in one of our sort of, caches, as it were. And also there's been multiple now end runs around Congress to provide millions in sort of like supplemental weaponry, that type of thing. And I would imagine also it would show the concern over the defunding of UNRWA, which is the primary source of aid distribution in Gaza. We will maybe talk a little bit later about this. We'll play this clip from Channel 4 in Britain, which they got a hold of whatever it was. I think it was a 12-page document that was given to the UNRWA funders, that being, U.S., Britain, Australia, et cetera. And it was based on that document that they suspended their funding. And when you read what the document says, it literally, I don't know, Dan Bongino could have come up with exactly the same evidence.
Yeah.
It's just an assertion.
And they took that assertion on face value and immediately acted on it on the day that the ICJ ruled that it was plausible that Israel was committing genocide. So weird.
Useful.
And but here is a clip as we talk about the sort of what's happening in. I just lost my sound sheet here.
It's on the on our here. I can pull it up here.
I can't find it.
It's this is Abby Phillips speaking with Dearborn Mayor Abdullah Hammoud.
Oh right,
so
okay.
As we're gearing up towards that Michigan primary, I mean, we've been sounding the alarm on this program for a few months at this point. We're 4 months into Israel's massacre in Gaza. And there are many Arab American voters who are, I heard Matt Duss describe it on Democracy Now! Yesterday as incandescent with rage. And Biden seemingly is flippant about the effects that this is going to have in Michigan, but he has very small margins there, and we need a lot of turnout to defeat Donald Trump. But this was the mayor, Abdullah Hammoud, speaking to Abby Phillip about Biden's recent trip to Michigan and how he didn't make really much of an effort at all.
And we should just also say that I think sometime in the past week, the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed that called Dearborn Jihad Central or something.
Capital, yeah.
I mean, just so bigoted.
Welcome to Dearborn, America's jihad capital.
Listen, in many respects, worse than it was in the wake of 9/11. As we got closer, like in the Obama era, this sort of came roaring back because I don't know what it was about Barack Hussein Obama that for some reason the huge swaths of the American public became virulently anti-Muslim because this guy's middle name was Hussein. But here's that interview.
Joining me now is Abdullah Hammoud. He's the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, which is home to one of the nation's largest Arab American communities. Mayor, thanks for joining us. President Biden is in your state courting union members, but he did not meet with Arab Americans during this trip. Was this a missed opportunity?
Well, I mean, maybe talk a little bit about what happened in Michigan.
What happened in Michigan? Well, President Biden is in your state courting union members, but he did not meet with Arab Americans during this trip. Was this a missed opportunity?
I absolutely think it's a missed opportunity whenever dialogue can happen, constructive dialogue that can help save lives, because that's the conversation we want to have. And calling for a ceasefire and ending the bombing and unrestricted military aid to Israel, we want to save lives. We believe no innocent man, woman, or child should be killed.
And to that end, the White House says that it's deploying senior administration officials to Michigan this month to discuss a number of issues with community leaders there, including this war. If the White House does extend an invitation to meet, will you accept it?
For anybody who wants to have a conversation about how we change course, that's the only condition, that there has to be a willingness and an openness to change course on what's unfolding now. Secretary Blinken just last week said that the Middle East is the most volatile it's been in 50 years. And that's that's due in part because of this administration's decision making. So if they're willing to come to the table with an open mind on how to change course, that's a conversation and dialogue that we can partake in.
So you're saying that you really only want to sit down if they say in advance that they are willing to change their strategy. Is that what your position is?
If you had a disagreement with your congressional official and you said you wanted to voice your concerns, and if they said, hey, I'll come listen to you, but I'm never going to change my mind, I think you yourself would say, hey, you know what, let's just pass in this conversation and save both our times. But if there's a willingness and an openness to say, hey, you in Dearborn, you might know a little something. We come from these Arab countries that everybody keeps talking about online. The largest portion of the city of Dearborn is largely Lebanese immigrants, Palestinian, Yemeni, Syrian, Iraqi. In each one of these countries, we have lived through the firsthand accounts of apartheid, of occupation, of oppression, of bombardment, devastation, and bombing. And so we can speak from a firsthand accounts of what's actually unfolding on the ground.
Some Michigan Arabs and Muslims have launched a campaign, and they're saying abandon Biden, and they're urging members of their community to show up to the polls but not cast their vote for Biden. These efforts are also happening in other key states. This is, as I'm sure you know, going to be a very close election likely. Do you agree with this strategy, abandon Biden?
For me, that question has to be put back to the candidate, to President Biden. It's on the candidate. It's his responsibility to earn the trust and respect of the voters. I've run for office before. I've never pointed at the voters of my district and said, you're at fault if I'm not elected. In fact, it's me as the candidate. It's President Biden as the candidate to put forward a policy platform that is receptive to all of Americans. What we're asking for, a ceasefire, is not something that only the majority of Arab Americans and Muslim Americans support. In fact, over 60% of Americans support a ceasefire, over 80% of Democrats. And so for me, I would urge President Biden to heed the calls of Americans from coast to coast.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, certainly you want the president.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing is like, this is how democracy works, buddy. When it comes to presidential elections, there's this drive, and it's usually from white liberals chastising communities who may not turn out in the way that they deem sufficient because they don't feel represented, saying, well, I mean, do you want Trump? Do you want Trump? Well, when your maybe family members are, and I know this is for the primary, but going into the general, like when your family members maybe have been assassinated with money that's from your tax dollars, or when it's just a group Arab Americans that you identify with and you feel completely like your voice is not heard, withholding your vote is a way to get your voice heard, because the president has to come to you and say, I'm going to do this for you. That's how democracy works. And just like the poll numbers that he cited there, I want to add this as well. Data for Progress conducted the poll at the end of last year. 76% of Democrats support a ceasefire. He mentioned around 80%. But this more recent Economist YouGov poll that Jeet here cited in his piece around a week ago shows 49% of Democrats believe Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. That's nearly half of Democrats. 21% reject the genocide description altogether. 30% say they don't know. But that is a plurality closer to a majority of Democrats that believe they're committing genocide. And 40% of black people support the genocide description, 46% of Hispanics, and 49% of voters 18 to 29 believe Israel is committing genocide. Not just a ceasefire, but the genocide description. And that is, over the course of 4 months, a massive sea change in public opinion. And the White House has refused to change course, even though half of their voters, the biggest bloc in the Democratic Party, when answering that question, 49% accept the genocide description and believe that our government is supporting a genocide.
Let's continue on with this clip a little bit too, because he was asked that question. But the flip side of that too, I should say, is that from a political perspective, like the cost associated with calling for a ceasefire, even the cost associated with not rolling out a $14 billion aid package or leveraging that. I mean, we can see right now, this is an aid package for Israel that has been proposed by the administration for a month and a half, 45 days. It was a mid to early December when this was proposed. And if someone can find me a single voter who has said, I'm not voting for the Republicans because they're holding up this aid to Israel.
Yeah.
It's just not happening. And so the flip side of what Biden could be doing is there's no cost associated with that. Like the American public is not going to hold a U.S. president accountable for calling for a ceasefire in this conflict. It's just there's no evidence of that whatsoever. Just to cover the other side of that ledger, but continue.
President to change his position. I think one of the things that and I know you've gotten a lot of questions about this, people are wondering about realistically what is the alternative and what does that alternative mean for the Palestinian people? Does it worry you about what a Trump presidency could mean for those lives that you said earlier? You're concerned about each and every one of the innocent people who shouldn't die being saved.
Absolutely. I think Trump is a threat to American democracy. So the question should stand. What will President Biden do to prevent the unraveling of our American democracy? Why is being aligned with Benjamin Netanyahu and the most right-wing government in Israel's history worth potentially sacrificing our American democracy? I had a resident that came before a city council meeting who had lost over 80 family members in Gaza. And the question in everybody's mind is, while we send our condolences for your loved ones, we want to know how you're going to vote come November. And I think that's extremely dehumanizing to think of Palestinian lives only in the context of polls. Arab American lives and Muslim American lives outside of the context of just polls.
Well, yeah, I totally understand that. I think, but really what I'm wondering about is not about the polls, but do you believe genuinely that President Biden, I think the White House would say this, behind the scenes, that they're trying to put pressure on the Israeli government to reduce the loss of innocent lives? Do you believe that at all, or do you think that that's not happening?
I believe those are political talking points. There's never been a war in history in which 80% of the country is absolutely decimated, where 100% of the population has been displaced, and where 50% of all the deaths are children. That has never happened. For us, we want action, not lip service. If President Biden wants to take a firm stance, he could begin by restricting military aid to the state of Israel. He could begin by calling a ceasefire, because right now, nearly 200 civilians are killed each and every single day. These are tangible steps that can be taken, because what we understand is only diplomatic efforts can lead to lasting peace and justice.
All right, Mayor Abdullah Hammoud, thank you.
She seems upset about the whole thing. But
that shows the importance of attaining power. Like, we get lost in the forest of lesser evil voting and stuff like that. And, but that guy won power, and he's able to go and say not good enough.
100%.
And that's my main concern with, not voting things, is it would hurt guys like him that are on the Democratic ticket. I mean, you can find some Republicans that maybe you can send them my way, but I think like the generic, I'm not going to vote because both parties are the same. It might hurt a guy like that. That's my concern foremost with stuff like that. But that shows the importance of like actually working and getting power.
Super effective. I mean, super impressive for a guy who's just mayor of a small city. I mean, it's not, I've known some mayors of small cities, and I don't know that they're really, it can be that effective in that type of scenario. frankly, but very helpful because you got to know that was, I mean, it obviously would have reached the White House more had it been on Morning Joe, but you got to know that maybe somebody clipped it and sent it to him.
2 straight cable news presidents. It's
Yes,
awesome.
actually, that's a great idea.
God.
If there's if there's a Morning Joe booker watching this show, please get the Dearborn Mayor on. I am begging of you. If you have an ounce of humanity and you're a Morning Joe booker watching this show, get the Dearborn Mayor on, and then maybe we can break through.
I'm quite sure there's a Morning Joe producers who watch this show, and I'm also quite sure that person will not be booked on that show. I'm
Listen
quite
to
sure
me.
of both of those things.
Yeah. We'll feature it.
That's not the
Quid
issue.
pro quo.
That's not the issue.
Okay.
They're not worried about being featured on
Oh,
this
they don't
thing.
care?
No,
Oh,
as
no.
long as it's played in the White House, honestly, that is exactly, that's all. I mean, Morning Joe has always been a middling at best ratings, but it is because it appeals to the no labels crowd and to apparently, like folks who are living in the early 90s, like Joe Biden. That's what it appeals to.
Watch the Morning Joe and then get back to work reading Matt Iglesias.
Maybe. He's
no,
got
that's
a couple of
confirmed.
years. He's got a couple of years until he gets up there. Yeah, no, but
No, they read
Yeah.
Iglesias.
only because David Broder passed away.
I am going to combust.